Hi, everyone. This is Bobby Harris, the Executive Director of the Utility Broadband Alliance, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back today to another great webinar. We are really fortunate to have Nokia host this webinar and to also bring along some really terrific subject matter experts because, this is one of those key topics when you're talking about security that you can't do enough on. And if you ever stop doing cyber, you're in trouble. So we want to always continue to move that forward. I will say, just for housekeeping, as you're getting logged in, if you've never used this tool before, there is a questions box over on your toolbar. If you would like to ask questions of the panelists. We will save those for the end and we'll do our best to get to all of those. Obviously, if we don't, we'll follow up with you offline. Nokia will follow up with you offline on your questions, but we'll do our very best. But most important, we want to get straight into the great topics. These guys have been members of UBBA since day one. We have been very fortunate to have them willing to share their knowledge and expertise. We will be meeting in person in about 10 days in Charlotte to the sold out UBBA Summit and Plugfest, expecting a record crowd in Charlotte, and that's really exciting. It shows the value that UBBA brings and that our members are bringing to the industry. So Anuj, I'm going to turn it straight to you, sir. From Nokia's perspective, I would love for you to just set up our topic, get us launched, and then let's get into the conversation, sir.
Thank you, Bobby. Hello, everyone. I'm Anuj Kumar. I lead the Nokia security consulting business for telecommunication in North America. And as Bobby said, I'm honored to introduce the panel here, represented by three valuable experts, to share the best practices around building a secure blueprint for our private wireless and utilities. And we have Jonathan Singer, who is the Director of Product Marketing at OneLayer. Then we have Ron Brady, Senior OT Network Architect at Xcel Energy. And Patrick Donegan. Patrick is the founder and principal analyst with HeartStance. And as Bobby said, we over the next 45 minutes, we will discuss the best practices for securing a private wireless network, covering strategies to safeguard high-value assets in increasingly connected environments on a private wireless network, embracing zero-touch for ultimate resilience, and need for more cybersecurity frameworks like EDR and NDR, and how we can, at the end, AI is taking all the limelight here, so how we can leverage an AI to revolutionize the defense. So with that, since Nokia published its threat intelligence report, and we see that cyber threats are targeting the critical infrastructure. So Patrick, why don't we start with you? Could you please share your views around what are the lessons learned and best practices that can be applied to strengthen the cybersecurity posture in utility space?
Yeah, by all means, thanks, Anuj. So I think in terms of the first topic, the threat landscape, I think the way I would look at it in the first instance is to take the so-called CIA triangle of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I think what I would point to is how the history and background of cybersecurity has traditionally been focused very heavily on the confidentiality side. And in my mind, the threat landscape over the last 12 to 18 months or so has moved fairly, has shifted in terms of where the risk is. And I think there's quite a bit more risk now to availability than there used to be. If you look at the UK, for example, we've had some major attacks on food retailers that have severely impacted availability. The Jaguar Land Rover attack, JLR's production lines completely suspended. I think they've estimated it in the last couple of days, total cost of $1.9 billion, £1, sorry. The UK's GDPR number for the year materially impacted by this attack. It's the largest cyber attack in UK history, very much focusing on availability. And if you look at those attacks that are specifically targeting critical infrastructure, the obvious example there is obviously Volt Typhoon. And similarly, if you think of traditional nation-state threat actors from China, they typically targeted espionage. They would come in, they would have a look around, they would get the information they needed, and then they'd be gone. Volt Typhoon has a partially similar profile. Yes, it uses espionage. Yes, it hides in the network, it conceals itself, and it studies the environment, studies information. But stealing information is not that is a means to an end rather than an end in itself. The end, as I'm sure people will know, is to be able to disrupt, and potentially trigger full-scale outages of critical infrastructure as and when the Chinese state deems it convenient to do so. So I think that's a fundamental thing I would draw attention to, is that the balance of risk has shifted towards disruption and outright prolonged suspension of operations, which is a very, very serious threat. Having said that, just one concluding comment would be that whilst we think about these advanced threats, I think if you consider, what the folks responsible for security at the Louvre Museum in Paris just a couple of weeks ago, where they were thinking in terms of what threats to their crown jewels were, I don't think they would have had a bunch of guys with scooters, a flatbed truck, and an angle grinder on their mind. So, as well as being alive to and preparing for the most advanced, sophisticated cyber threats, I think we have to have a broader perspective on security that takes account of all possibilities, wherever they may come from and however. But that's my opening thoughts. Let me turn this over to Ron. Ron, where are you on this question of what the threat landscape looks like for utilities?
Thank you, Patrick. I think one of the things that we have learned here at Xcel Energy over the last couple of years is when you talk about private networks and keeping them secure, you want to make sure that you're not integrating older technology, shall I say, some things like SMS, things like HTTP, that are not secure and that are pretty easily, broken, accessed. You need to think about that. The other thing that we've learned is that you want to do regular penetration testing by a qualified third party that can give you good constructive feedback on how your network is, how secure your network is. And you want to test those security policies, and you want to test those security elements to make sure that you haven't left any holes anywhere. And it is, and I wouldn't say you don't just do this once, you do this on a regular basis. And when I say a third party, maybe not just one third party, but more than one third party, so that you get different points of view to make sure that you're thinking about things like, just as you said, the Louvre Museum, they weren't prepared for guys on scooters, flatbed trucks, and angle grinders. That again, simplistic access is how they got in. It's what we have found is, and what we have been told is that bad actors are not going to come in through those difficult access points. They're going to pick the easiest, most nondescript access point they can find. And it's not just about your your firewalls, your security protocols. You want to look at things too, like your random access. Who's take a look at that. That needs to be reviewed. Who's trying to access your network? Is it, are you getting a consistent hit on your sites from somebody that you can't recognize, someone trying to gain access to your network, in terms of threat hunting, identifying a threat, a potential threat, and making sure that you've got all the doors locked, all the windows closed, make sure that there's no viable way that anyone can access your network. And then the other thing that we learned is it's not just enough to have them knocking on the outside of the door. You have to let them in and say, okay, what happens if someone does get in? How far can they go? Are my quarantine measures sufficient? All those things combined together help make for a secure network. And yes, it is going to be a lot of work, but it is well worth it. We have found that it's well worth the effort, and that it not only makes your network more secure, it makes it operate better. So it's not just the security, the money you spend on security and the time and attention you spend on these little details does more than just keep your network secure. It kind of streamlines your operations so that it has a greater effect across your network. It's not just a single point or a single area that you're impacting. So I would say, just those are the two big things that we have learned here at Excel. So I'm going to just pop back over to Anuj and get his opinion and what his thoughts are on this.
Yeah, sure. So I think, Ron, what you added, and Patrick, I mean, one thing is clear that it's always about taking the information, but as we are seeing that not all attacks are about that. They are actually, most of the attacks are a fundamental shift in just stealing the information, but they are now living off the land, where they are trying to understand how these companies operate, what they do, what methods they use, so that they can learn about it. They can tailor their malwares and practices, and then they can kind of do a bigger disruption than just attacking a particular industry or a particular customer in that case. So I think that's something that we have seen. Almost like 2/3 of the operators that hit last year had some of these malwares implanted in the network for 12 to 18 months, right? So we have seen an increase in that kind of scenarios.
I think just if I may, Anuj, some of the terrific data that comes out of the recent Nokia threat intel report. It's a great report that comes out every year. It came out, I think, a week or so ago. Right. But one of the really interesting things I find with that is when you see, to your point, you see these high numbers where service providers report a very high number of intrusions, a very high number of incidents that they've seen. But what always has to be prefaced with that is, okay, these are the ones they've seen, right? What are the real numbers that include the ones they haven't seen, right? Okay, Jonathan, where are you on the threat landscape? What's one layer seeing from its vantage point?
Sure. So that was actually perfect timing, because I did want to poke in there and talk a little bit about perspective. And everything we're talking about right now is very IT security, like where are the intrusions, do pen testing, all of that sort of thing. And for those out there who may be, earlier in their cellular journey, and perhaps the recent events in New York City with all of that huge SIM farm that was found by the U.S. Secret Service, that might be kind of hanging at your executive level, whereas they haven't really thought about some of the threats, and now they're saying, hey, wait, can you find out about that? Is that a danger for us? So now you're depending on where you are in your journey of building a cellular network, we've gotten past the point of 5 years ago where the question for you all was like, is this 5G thing going to work? Right? Like, we're past that. We know it's going to work. And so now where we're at is you're building out and you're starting to deploy these cellular networks, right? And when you talk about who's trying to access your network, there's a fundamental perspective in change that you need to make here, because your enterprise access model is this authentication and password-based who is on my network. When you move to cellular, the architecture is fundamentally different. And right, because cellular networks are originally built for a subscriber-based access model, right? And so now it's, who's that? What is that device? And is that device the same device it was when it was onboarded? Has it been swapped? Has it been changed? Was it misconfigured in the first place? And now if you think about, all right, you're going to launch this network and you're going to scale it to operate mission critical workloads for, say the US or in your country, you need to start thinking about it from a device perspective. And how do I, if you're going to go 10,000 devices, if you're going to go 100,000 devices, as you depending on the size, you need to start thinking really clearly about, how do I get security that's going to scale to that magnitude? How am I going to manage those devices, understand where they are, what's their behavior, what are they doing, are they secure? Is the security state, was it a static process, or is it something that adapts via context? And so you've got 100,000 devices on your network now, and you need to recognize that scale and recognize the stress that that's going to put and the on your systems and how that changes the nature of your attack surface. And so take that and a change into perspective to think about, like, how do I see my cellular network differently than I do my traditional IT infrastructure? And how can I bridge that gap between the two of them? And so that's the perspective that we come from at OneLayer.
Why don't you stick with us, Jonathan? Because one of the topics we wanted to speak about was the whole area of zero trust. And that's obviously an area where you guys excel in the domain that you play in. Why don't you kick us off on this question of zero trust, Jonathan?
Sure. So, if I segue straight into that, when we think about zero trust at a cellular level, again, you need to, go back and look at that perspective. And so how do I segment my devices? And I actually, I could sit here and talk, but I kind of want to lateral it back to Ron to talk a little bit about, and I know you had an order, Patrick, and I might be screwing it up, so I apologize ahead of time if I do that. But Ron, you're the one who's operating this network, and how do you think about this when you're saying, okay, I need to go from this IT mindset to this device-centric, network-centric mindset? Like, what are you looking at?
So from our perspective, to be honest, when we try to define zero trust, we scratch our head a little bit. That's a fine term, zero trust, but what does it mean? What does it mean in terms of zero trust? Okay, I don't trust anyone from the outside, but I also don't trust my devices. I don't trust my infrastructure. And here's another question. All right, now this is not going to be fun. Do I trust my vendors? Are my vendor partners doing their part to establish themselves as a trusted partner from a security standpoint in meeting all of my requirements? And and again, this when we say zero trust, what does that mean? That means I trust no one. I trust nothing, no thing, no machine, no vendor, no person, no employee. So, and it sounds very macabre, right? When it's kind of dark, right? When we start talking about zero trust. But the truth of the matter is, in a lot of my research in terms of security and protecting our network from bad actors, there's two elements to a good hack. There is an equipment element and there's a software element. Well, hey, if I've got equipment software covered, I'm in good shape, right? Well, no, because then I force those bad actors to try to become an employee. So now there's a physical security element that needs to be fed into that as well. When we say zero trust, we here at Excel are talking about the entire package. That's why, Jonathan, you and I and Dave and Alex all have really good conversations about where we're going. Then as soon as I get through talking with you, I'm going to Anush and I'm saying, okay, Anush, we got to have a conversation infrastructure wise. And then maybe with Patrick or with others, I'm saying, okay, we need to know what this whole package looks like. And how do we zero trust is a nice term, but unless we have it defined, it doesn't really do a whole lot of good, right? It's just talk. So from our point of view, we are working really hard to define zero trust and what that encompasses. And if you take it at face value, it means trust no one, no thing from anywhere. So that's kind of our point of view, and that's how we're moving forward with this. So I probably threw a monkey wrench in your response, Jonathan. That's really where we're coming from.
No, I think that's really interesting because, of course, from our perspective, it's like, well, this is an access and identity model, right? This is like, and it's a segmentation model, and it's who has access to what, can they access things, we say east-west or north-south, like other parts of the network, other devices in this direction and that direction. And so I appreciate the big step back you're taking. And Anush, it looked like you were going to say something. I might have just run over you there.
So no, absolutely. I think what you shared, Ron and Jonathan, around zero trust. But I'll also add one equation here. Your employees as well as your contractor partners who work on your equipment and systems is another one that needs to be added to the equation, that we cannot trust those. We have seen attacks in the past where the employees have been bribed and they have shared the credentials and have created the attacks, right? And especially, Jonathan, I mean, you talked about the devices, right? And especially in the utility space, you're still using trusted and untrusted 3GPP network, right? Where Wi-Fi is still there, right? For some of the devices are still using the Wi-Fi, and it has been seen that most 40% plus of the attacks that happened originated from the endpoints, which are there in the outside in the field, right? Using the default credentials. So we have to look at that, and we have to make sure that your identity access management, your privileged access management policies for devices, not the end devices, but the servers and server farm that you are using, your Windows terminals, everything needs to be have a policy around that. Nobody can share the passwords, right? Have multi-factor authentication inbuilt for every access. And traditionally in the OT space, we still see the gap, a major gap in that, because the OT network has been designed over the years, evolved from 2G, 3G to and 4G and 5G. So we still have compromised protocols that are still being used. We still have the equipments and softwares which still don't support the traditional modern authentication mechanism, and that's where we have to bridge that gap by building solutions around it.
Let me maybe throw something in here in terms of the sort of continuous monitoring and anomaly detection that's required to sort of enforce zero trust policies in a utility. So you're a power company or you're a water company, and you've deployed a new 4G, 5G network. Let me just kind of throw in a couple of positives and negatives. You know, relative to a telecom network deploying a 4G or 5G network, you have a significant advantage. There are you know, you don't have to support some of the old legacy protocols the way that a mobile network has to deploy a telco. Sorry. You're less exposed, or you should be less exposed to DDoS attacks, for example, because you shouldn't have your devices configured where they can be speaking to the internet. That shouldn't be happening. These networks are also smaller, much smaller than a Verizon or an AT&T, smaller than a lot of small telcos too. So you have small, your networks are smaller, and therefore you don't risk the same kind of complexity, which tends to lead to more security exposures. So that's the kind of upside in my mind if you're a utility deploying a mobile network. You have these upsides, but I would say there's a little bit of a downside too, in the sense that if you look at the sort of continuous monitoring and anomaly detection that's required, you actually can't go as a power company to friendly telcos and say, hey, how do you guys do this? Because actually, open secret, most of the telcos in this world, even in the US, they're not even doing it today. They're doing it in their enterprise IT network. Absolutely, they are, the way a lot of good folks are. But in the telco network, this anomaly detection, continuous monitoring is not happening in the RAN and the transport and the core the way it should be. Now, you may get lucky. You may get one or two in your neighborhood or in your country that are quite advanced. There's going to be one or two, sure, but most telcos aren't doing it yet. So as utilities figure this out, unfortunately, they can't go to a lot of telcos and say, show us how to do it. They're going to be heavily dependent on their vendors, heavily dependent on consultants to show them how.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different set of requirements again, right? Like a telco is very, very good at giving you a SIM card and billing you for it, right? That's what their network model is, right? And as an enterprise, you have a completely different model of access and a set of security demands. And you know, we're talking about some of the more in-depth IT threats as well, but we're not even mentioning, like, you know, they don't care if I take my SIM card out of my iPhone and put it into a new iPhone, as long as they're charging me for it. But if you've got a contractor out, you know, in the woods working on something for you, and he's like, yeah, my coverage here is terrible, and he pops his SIM card out of one of your devices and plugs it into his phone to make a call or be on YouTube for 5 minutes during his lunch break, can you see that happened? Do you know what happened? Can you quarantine that person? Or, you know, do you suddenly have like a security camera watching YouTube instead of your site, you know, like, or whatever they've unplugged and replugged. And so, like, those behavioral concerns, when I talk to folks in utilities or even, across the other verticals that we work with, I keep hearing, oh my God, and the contractor did this, right? And those are the things that, again, telco networks can't help you with because they don't really, that's not something they focused on.
Agreed.
All right, Jay, shall we move on to talking about EDR and NDR? This is a space where Nokia obviously plays, Anush. What's your view of the role for EDR and NDR in a utilities private network?
So I think an EDR, an EDR, or a XDR solution, as we are seeing, have a prominent role, right, in securing the endpoints, right, making sure that the example that Jonathan gave, right, that somebody picked up a SIM card from a utility device and put it into the phone. If you have a right solution in place, you can detect it real time and you can block it, right, by taking an action, appropriate action at that point of time. That also brings to the next topic of AI/ML, which we'll cover later, right? That some of these decisions needs to happen pretty fast, right, in almost real time as well. Additional to that, I mean, right now everybody's trying to move towards as much as automation they can use to reduce the OpEx, right? And with that comes by using some of the open source technologies, some of the cloud native architecture principles. And with that also comes the security vulnerabilities that are existing in the software. Now, if you have an XDR solution being deployed on your end nodes, you can actually see those vulnerabilities before it's published in the outer world, and also find a remediation method so that it can be put on there, right? So that nobody can try to exploit those. So I think that's where Nokia is very aggressively investing and have developed a solution to address the technical needs.
Let me understand that from you, though. So, if I'm the CISO or the head of security of a utility, and I'm rolling out my 4G, 5G network, my first impulse is probably going to be to say, okay, so we're connecting up laptops, smartphones, tablets to this network. We have an EDR solution already. I'm going to deploy that across all of those devices. We have an existing license. Why do I need anything new? If I know Nokia, when it comes to the servers that are hosting network functions, 4G, 5G network functions, you have a different view as to what the appropriate EDR solution is for that. It's one I would agree with, by the way. But why don't you address that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think in the utility and telco space, right, the availability is the key. I mean, the IT agents or XDR solutions that we have seen, and we have seen on our laptops and systems too, that when they run, they consume a lot of bandwidth from your processing as well as the memory, and you can see that your system is lagging. You are trying to open a presentation or a document, and it's taking a lot of time. However, you cannot have that kind of latency and delays into the telco or utility space, right? You need to provide almost have the KPIs achieved that you have designed the network for. And Nokia has designed a solution which actually is different from the telco from the IT side of solutions, and we test that extensively with our ecosystem of telco applications so that it doesn't impact the CPU, memory, and throughput, as well as the availability of the node. I mean, some of the examples from the industry, from the IT side, is that IDR is running, operational guy sees that, okay, my HSS node performance is getting degraded, and he just fired a kill -9 command on that EDR agent. And since agent was actually locking the IP table, it wiped out the entire system. However, so all of these learnings we put into our in designing our solution so that we don't impact the network. The performance of the network, the availability of the network is a key for us. Right.
So you brand it as EDR or XDR, but it shares the same brand as a lot of other products, but it's expressly for the mobile network functions, right?
Critical OT infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay, Ron, where does EDR, XDR sit in your view of cybersecurity requirements for a power company or water company?
So I think the first thing, there's no utility CISO that's not going to that's not going to segment their OT and IT traffic. Okay, they're going to literally look at it and say, hey, you know this IT traffic, it goes out over the internet. We have precautions in place, but this OT traffic, this is my command and control. This is the way I do my business every day. That is different. That is something entirely different. So they're going to be pushing for segmentation. I think you're going to see that on a lot of utilities. You've got regulating bodies that are pushing them for to segment that traffic and to take those extra steps to make sure that it doesn't intermix with that IT traffic. So that's a big thing. The other thing is utilities tend not to have that data. When you talk about detection and response, that data has to be analyzed. Utilities tend to have smaller teams. That data has to go to the right place. It's not just about being able to say, okay, let me look at that endpoint device and see if it's acting out of character. That information has to come into the network. It has to get to the right person. There has to be tickets open. There needs to be automation put in place and escalation policies that allow that information to go to the right person. And if it doesn't, there's someone else waiting in the wings to look at that information and respond. It's not the fact that you have bad actors accessing the network. It's the fact that no one responds. It's the fact that no one notices. If you take a look at a lot of the utility, look at Ukraine. You know, they had bad actors in their network for over a year. No one noticed. A green engineer figured out something wasn't right. He came in there and said, this is not normal. And then when they realized, when the bad actors realized that they had been caught, they took everything down. They had a year to learn how to take down that power grid. That is the big concern, making sure that the right information about the right endpoints gets to the right person and that it does not go unnoticed, and that it's not a judgment call. It can't be a judgment call. If there is something out of character, it needs to go to someone who can make a decision, who can analyze the data and act quickly. And yeah, you may get some false alarms, but wouldn't you rather have that than have somebody in your network for a year and take your whole power grid down, or your water network, or your steam network, your gas? I think we really have to call this out. I think we really have to say, okay, segmentation is important, notification is important, but acting on the data is paramount, and responding to those issues that are not the norm.
John?
So I think Ron just made a pretty powerful statement there, and you can take it in a bunch of different directions if you want to talk about compliance and the kind of real world implications of it. But I just want to highlight that, one of the things that Ron just talked about was the size of the team and their ability to act. And so whenever you're looking at any security solution, and Ron also said, hey, do you trust your vendors? When you've got those trusted solutions in place, it's like, what are the automations you can do? What are the ways that you can make it easier for a network or a security team with limited resources and time, but so much to do? How can you make it easy for them to act? Before I came to OneLayer, I was actually at an application security company, and we looked at customers that had a backlog of 10,000 or 20,000 software vulnerabilities, right? That they still they'd been alerted on, but they couldn't do anything about. And so when I look at Ron saying, yeah, like alerts are great, but like, what can you do with it? I think that's so critical, no matter where you are in security, is to make sure that like things are actionable, fixes can be done quickly, fixes can be done automatically where possible, right? So like, if we go back to a OneLayer perspective of a device, and a device has changed, do you know that the device has changed, has been automatically quarantined, and then you've been alerted? Or is it sitting there with an alert in a system hey, that you've got to pull out. It's like, no, we found this, we made this. This device is no longer attached. This person no longer has east-west access. And now you can deal with it further and reattach them if we've made a mistake. But, and I think that those sorts of automations is something to really take into account at the planning stage. And we haven't really touched on this yet as far as security architecture, when to bring security in, but like plan for the fact that your network is going to outstrip in size the size of your team. And so anything you can do to help them through, scale with the size of your network without going through massive change management processes is, I think, going to be really useful.
So if I may add to what Ron said, and Jonathan, you touched upon it, I mean, having a unified security monitoring through a centralized dashboard and a real-time visibility into what is happening is important, but a response, as Ron was saying, is also very important. And that's where, Jonathan, Nokia invested heavily on this product, where we have come up with 3,000 plus rules, right? Especially for OT network, because taking an action on an IT side versus taking action on the OT side has a very different impact. If you're shutting down the node, if you're killing an application, it could disrupt the entire network, and you could have much worse than what was happening earlier, right? So we have created a rules around it, 3,000 plus rules for different network functions to monitor specific things, as well as very tailored actions that you can take when you see these kind of things happening, right? So it's not always like that you can kill an application or you can quarantine a node. There has to be a certain process that needs to be followed, and that's where Nokia has invested a lot on that.
Yeah.
That's a pretty, oh, go ahead, Jonathan, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and it goes back to it does in a way go back, like when you've got those capabilities, like go back and plan for them at the beginning, as much as possible at the beginning of your cycle. And it's like, what am I going to do with this network? What are all the different use cases? Am I going to have connected worker here? Am I going to have SCADA systems connected there? Like, plan those out for your growth so that you know how you're going to add on and change as you go. Sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
No, it's all no. So Anuj, I think what you said last it provides a fairly neat segue into talking about Gen AI and where it fits in the scheme of things. That's something that Nokia has done a decent bit of work in. What are your thoughts?
So yeah, I mean, Nokia has been, I mean, AI, as we said, I mean, we are seeing the impact of AI at every place, including the telco networks, where every utility or a telco customer is trying to leverage AI. And we have seen that AI, it's like fighting a fire with a fire. With AI, our threat actors are also using AI to kind of, when the vulnerability is exposed, in about 17 minutes, they have the mechanism to actually exploit that vulnerability, right? So you need a holistic approach around how you can actually handle those kind of scenarios as well. So the traditional approach where operations team sitting and monitoring the dashboard, and then they see something and then they try to act on it, defense mechanism, it's not going to work. You need to have AI inbuilt into your tools and technologies, as well as you need to kind of upskill your employees as well, right? So that they can use the AI and the technologies that are available in the market to create the defense mechanism around it. And Nokia has been working on solutions around it, where we can actually connect all the dots in the network using the inventory of the network and come up with a holistic approach that, okay, how the threat has been progressing, what is the threat score of it, what are the right mechanisms to kind of handle that threat vector, right? So we have invested, and that's where our rules and the policies comes in from the OT side.
One thing too, Patrick, that I wanted to add, and earlier I had said that there are two elements to a good hack. One of it is the hardware side. I was stunned to see a white hat hacker build a rogue base station in 45 minutes with AI. 45 minutes. That's how long it took him to build a rogue base station. Now, that doesn't mean it can access your network. That doesn't mean that they'll gain access just because they build a base station or rogue base station and they try to intercept your traffic. But the fact that they can utilize AI to do in 45 minutes what used to take weeks is something we all need to consider.
Jonathan, did you want to add something?
Sure. I mean, I was there an addition exactly to that point, or I can talk a little bit more generally about a different point of AI and its kind of intersection with 5G that I think is going to be pretty interesting. Which specifically is, depending on how you as an enterprise out there, as a utility, are going to implement AI, and we're seeing an increasing need to connect, edge devices to your AI algorithms, right? So if you're looking at using AI internally for yourself, not even necessarily from a security standpoint, but to influence real-time operations in your network, like what are the AI and the machine learning algorithms that you're going to use? Those require like highly reliable connectivity and trust in the source that data is being gathered from. So when we're looking at AI, because we don't provide generative AI solutions, we actually think about how that affects, operations, and making sure that if you're a network owner, that you've got proper guardrails and visibility into what's happening on your network when you enable AI to feed off of that data, right, and off of that connectivity. So it's a different way of looking at AI than Ron talking about building a rogue base station in 45 minutes, which is a terrifying proposal. But you also, if you think about some of the kind of complex forward-thinking ways that you might use AI to support your operations, you want to think about what's the data that's being used to train those and how reliable is that data. And that takes us back to a lot of things that Manoj and I have been talking about as far as like the fidelity of the devices on your network, the fidelity of the connections to your network, and what data is being kind of input and taken in.
I think so. I would agree, certainly in terms of the your example of a full space station, and it's obviously the kind of the arms race between the attackers and the defenders ultimately. I mean, there are good examples of Gen AI being used to accelerate, improve the processing of cyber incidents, reduce mean time to detection, mean time to respond, all that good thing. I think that is coming along fairly nicely. I guess another point I think is probably worth making at this juncture, that AI is Gen AI, I should say. Obviously, AI has been used for a number of years for detection and what have you. But as a general principle, if you don't have fundamentals like multi-factor authentication, like privileged access management in place, and some utilities don't today. If you don't have those in place, then talking about how Gen AI is going to improve your incident processing is probably a little premature. So I guess it does come down to are you prioritizing your investments appropriately? If you are at a point where Gen AI becomes relevant and appropriate because you've got some of the more basic fundamentals in place, then terrific. You're in a great place. Okay, shall we move on to the last point of the discussion, which is if I remember rightly now, is the whole collaborative strategies dimension, Ron. And you guys are in the business of collaborating with partners, peers and partners. What are your thoughts on the environment and the kind of mandates with respect to collaboration across the ecosystem today?
So, I mean, when we start talking about collaboration, I think we've got a good example of collaboration right here in this webinar, right? So we work on a daily basis with Nokia. They're our infrastructure vendors. We work closely with OneLayer and with other utilities. We share the information. We have openly stated at UBBA, at Distributech, and other venues that we are willing to talk to any utility, anywhere, any place, anytime, and to share what we've learned on our PLTE journey. And that being said, we have gleaned a lot from other utilities like Ameren, Evergy, San Diego Gas and Electric, and others. I hope I haven't left anybody out on the venue. So I think that when you talk about collaboration, for us, it's imperative. No idea goes to waste. There is no collaboration point that we will not exploit. And having good partners like Nokia and OneLayer and UBBA and others, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them out there. I mean, we have a lot of vendor partners, but we really believe that the only way to be successful in this venture, and whether it's security or whether it's customer satisfaction or whether it is resiliency, is going to be to collaborate early, collaborate often, and then collaborate again. Make sure that you understand what's coming, make sure that you understand where you've been, make sure that you understand where you are today. So I would say that you just can't say enough good things about collaboration, but especially between your vendors and your vendor partners. And, don't be afraid to ask them questions. Ask them the hard questions, because, they want to give you good answers. So we have had such a positive experience with the collaboration environment that we've seen inside of PLTE and this group. I just can't say enough good things about it.
Let me maybe address an elephant, literally an elephant in the room. So you've talked about bilateral relationships and peer-to-peer partnerships and collaboration, immensely important, of course. Let's talk about, in the US, let's talk about the role of the federal government. And let's talk about the two CISAs, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and then the Cyber Information Sharing Act, CISA, the two CISAs, if you will. So, there's some downgrading of the resourcing of CISA, the agency, a failure just in the last couple of weeks of Congress to reauthorize the CISA Act, and implications, some pretty negative implications for the role of the federal government in providing a lead with respect to threat sharing. What are your thoughts on that, Ron? I mean, you talked about the bilateral side, it's massive, but what about the role of the federal government? I mean, that's been tremendously useful. People are worried that CISA, the agency, isn't going to play the same role it has in the past. What are your thoughts on that?
So, as far, we definitely leverage our federal government partners wherever possible, but we really take ownership of our networks. Whether the federal government says, oh, we were just kidding, you don't really need to take it that seriously. If we believe that it's important and that it exposes Xcel Energy and our customers in any way, we are going to take the firm stance to keep it up. We're going to do it anyway, whether we're demanded to by the federal government or not. And we will communicate with them, and our executives are committed to making sure that they communicate with our federal partners and explain to them what we believe is important and where the priorities lie. And if we feel like that they're falling down, we're not afraid to tell them, hey, we feel like we need a little more support from you. And so I think, our record speaks for itself. Yes, we look at those things, we pay attention to those things, but whether the federal government decides to enforce something or not, if we believe it's imperative in protecting our customers and our partners, we're going to do it anyway. I think, most utilities take that stance. If a partner is just that, a partner, but you shouldn't be codependent upon them entirely. You have to take ownership for your own networks, your own atmosphere, and you have to take responsibility for keeping those networks secure. Because at the end of the day, if you have not met the demands and a bad actor has gotten in, it's going to be you. You're going to be the one that's standing at the podium saying, this happened, I'm really sorry. This is what we're doing to fix it, and you really don't want those kinds of things to happen at all.
Jonathan, where are you on the collaboration requirements?
Sure. So I think where I want to start with is that you better collaborate because your opponents are, right? So and this goes true if you're talking about organized crime or you're talking about nation state attackers, right? That these are highly organized, highly sophisticated entities or groups of entities. I mean, the criminal element can go to highly unsophisticated, but they all talk on Reddit and the dark web. So, but that's the point, right? They're all talking to one another. They're all learning from one another. When things come to light, even if they weren't originally talking, they're learning from that. So anything you kind of hide away, any questions you don't ask, is just less information in the community of people who are trying to protect their network. So yeah, talk to your vendors, ask us hard questions. We don't care. We don't want to sell you something that a year from now is going to cause a huge problem. We want a year from now for you to be like, wow, I'm really glad we're working with you, right? So we're going to give you the best answers we can. Talk to one another in person at events, pick up the phone and call one another. It's the sharing of information amongst the white hat community is absolutely essential.
I think it's important what you said there about the level of sophistication as well, there, Jonathan, and that's why on the part of some of those threat actors, particularly the nation-state threat actors, that's why I worry on the federal side that it is only national government that can get access to some of that nation-state stuff, and if there's a shortfall in what those guys are contributing, that has a potential to have a negative effect, I think.
And it's a massive concern. So I mean, there's also, when it comes to collaboration, it's also like find out more about your enemy, right? Like I used to do a presentation in a prior role called Criminal Economics, where I kind of explained how exactly criminals attack and exploited a specific industry. And so you want to go back and you want to understand that, like, well, what do criminals have to gain by exploiting you and by attacking you? And like, what are the possible vectors, the most likely forms of attack that they take versus what nation states want to do, right? How long do they want to hang around in your network? What are they going to do while they're in there, right? Completely different reasons for being there and potential end goals, right? And you need to understand it all. And if you don't know, you need to ask someone.
Anuj, wind us up on the whole area of collaboration from a Nokia perspective.
So yeah, Nokia, we are committed to secure the critical infrastructure. We are creating our solutions which are vendor software agnostic, can work with any vendor, and we are participating with our customers. We are having regular meetings. We are participating in their security compliances where we are coming up and suggesting them the right things to do. Nokia has developed a team of security consultants across IT and OT who are trying to bridge the gaps as well when the questions are being asked at what are the right policies and frameworks to follow. So a huge investment has been going on in this area, and it helps Nokia as well when our customers are talking and the requirements are common. It helps us evolve our products faster and better than creating a custom solution specific to one customer versus second customer. So we have seen this. We are participating in those. We have signed NDAs with multiple CISOs on the telco as well as utility side to come and talk about what we have done, what we have seen in the last 3 months or 6 months. So, yeah.
Very good. Okay. Do we have any questions, Bobby?
Yeah, so first let me say this has been really insightful, and I appreciate it, especially that collaboration part, because that's part of the mission of UBBA. One of the first questions, and I don't know if we'll get to everybody's, and if we don't, that's fine. We will follow up. Nokia will follow up offline. But I'm just going to start with this first one, and you guys can talk a bit about it. I think you talked a little bit about it, but what has changed in practice when it comes to incident response plans or planning? Thoughts on that?
Changed in practice. Well, I suppose, one area would be the requirement to report incidents to government. This has been a highly controversial area in the course of the last couple of years all over the world. It's not just in the US. It's been pretty big in the US and elsewhere. This whole question, and it's still a very vexed issue. The whole question of when is an appropriate time when is an appropriate occasion to report. When is there such a thing as too much reporting, when you're bogging an organization down in doing too much of it. In the UK with the Telecom Security Act, we've had a lot of controversy around the way that people, even if there's been no incident occur, Ofcom here in the UK is requiring that telcos report having seen something anomalous, even if there has been no specific incident. So that area there is a move towards greater reporting, I would say, but it's still a complex and vexed area. That would be my thought. Anybody else have anything to add?
I think what we've seen, if you step back a little bit and you look over the last couple of years, I think you're seeing utilities becoming, they've stopped being reactive. We're not just reacting to something, we're actively hunting for threats and actually looking for something that may be a weakness. I think that is the big change, right? Or at least from my perspective, that's the big change. We're becoming, we're playing offense, not just defense, right? We're not just trying to make sure that the doors are locked and the windows are closed. We're trying to assess what threats are potentially out there and where they may be coming in. So I mean, to me, that's the biggest change.
If I'll just add, it's worth noting that, and Patrick, you mentioned government. I think that when you think about how incident response has changed, you may want to look at some of the regulations that are driving it. So you may want to go back and look at NERC-CIP and the NERC-CIP 15 adjustment that happened, I think it was June of this past year, right? That kind of expands into this, what is it, ESP, right? Electronic security perimeter. Right, they're changing the nature of that, so you have to think really differently about like what you're required to respond on, and what are the capabilities that you need to have in order to continue to meet this compliance, right? But it'll come out in the change, the actions will come out in the end, but you do need to look at some of the drivers, and I think that is one that you need to keep an eye on and understand if you're a utility.
Okay. Any other questions, Bobby?
Well, actually, we're close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to pause there and turn it back to you guys for final closing comments so that we don't miss that insight, and we'll follow up with questions offline.
Okay, I don't know that I was planning a closing comment, but I think I'll go with one anyway. I guess one thing I would, maybe one closing comment, is that we've talked a lot about technology and architecture and operational best practice. We talked about zero trust. I think one thing that is maybe worth saying is that there is one area totally outside the kind of zero trust architecture discussion where actually what is required is a very, very high degree of trust. And it is arguably the single most important aspect of trust, I would argue. And that is the level of trust between the board, the chief executive, and he or she who is charged with cybersecurity, whether you call them a CISO, whether you call them a head of IT, IT security. That role for those, for folks who are in the cybersecurity business will recognize this immediately. Those who are not may perhaps not recognize it. It's more to them than folks who are in cybersecurity. The relationship between CISO and CEO and board is enormously important, and it must be based on a high level of trust, and it frequently isn't. There's a lot. It is not the CISO's role to protect the organization against cybersecurity, believe it or not. In my mind, the role of the CISO is to define, layers, ranges of cybersecurity risk in business language to management, and for management to pick a level of risk that they are choosing to take, and then to hold the head of security's feet to the fire with respect to meeting that specific level of risk that the management and board have chosen. Very different thing, and there's an enormous amount of trust involved in getting that right. You cannot have a situation where the CEO, throws the CISO to the wolves the minute there's an attack of any kind. The minute there's an incident of any kind. Equally, you cannot have a situation where the security folks can't actually communicate cybersecurity in business language to management. So I've gone on a little long. That would be my closing remark. Ron, how about yourself?
So Patrick, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think leadership has to take an active role in defining what level of risk they're willing to take. And that needs to be communicated across the organization, not just between the CISO and executive leadership. And I think if, there has to be training programs, right? So you can't expect every employee everywhere at every level to know the security posture of the company if you're not training toward that security posture. I think, their regular testing of security processes is very important. I think the other thing I think that's really important is being involved in groups like UBBA, where you can have that collaboration. We talked about collaboration all through this webinar. I think that UBBA and others are really good places for us to share that information, to collaborate, to share best practice, to share what we have found works, to share maybe something new that we discovered through a webinar or through white papers. I think you've been given a wonderful opportunity for collaboration through UBBA. I think you should take advantage of that. And thanks, Patrick and Anush and Jonathan. You guys are great. You're a great group to work with, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this webinar.
Anush?
Absolutely. I think I can concur what Patrick, you and Ron said. I mean, it's a joint responsibility, and the team needs to come together to understand the risk and mitigation plans and craft the roadmap around those things together.
Couldn't agree more. And do it early. Do all this early, as early as possible in your process. That's the closing thought from me. Is
That's
plan
an awesome
for
closing
security.
thought, yeah, on the money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Sarah.
Well, thank you all so much. Those were exactly the kind of closing comments we wanted. We appreciate you being on. We appreciate Nokia hosting this very insightful webinar. We appreciate Xcel Energy and OneLayer as members of UBBA sharing their expertise in the collaboration. And Patrick, of course, from your analyst perspective, we appreciate your insights. And so again, thank you all. We hope that everyone will come to Charlotte if they were able to get a registration and meet you guys in person. Otherwise, we will see you on the next webinar. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.